Hi, y'all. It's Bridget Cudshaw with Real Things Living. Today, my guest is Susan Servais. Hope I said that right. She is a retired CEO of the Massachusetts Health Council, and she has been really involved in women's health and rights. And she has recently been involved in her mom's memoir called Escape from Dachau, a true story of survival and a daring escape in the face of unthinkable evil. Can you say hi, Susan?
Hey, hi. Thank you, Bridget, so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to do this and to talk about my mom's book. And
I am definitely interested in talking to people who love books, by the way. But then I also think it's so important. It's to read is important, but to also understand history is important. And this is a great story about history and what happened during or right before World War II, is my understanding, right? Or
during
it's
that period,
yeah,
absolutely.
during that period. There's so many things on different perspectives. People have different backgrounds, but your family actually lived the trauma. And so I guess the first thing that popped into mind, and I'm glad your mom did this, but why did she want to do this book?
Well, first of all, let me just say that my mom and my grandparents never spoke a word about the Holocaust. I knew that my mom was from Germany. I did not know her story. And when this book came out, she'd been living in Dayton, Ohio. That's where I grew up for 65 years. And her friends were shocked to read this story. In the year two, every year, since about the 1960s, late 50s, the German government had established a program called Return of Our Lost Citizens. Every year, my mom had been invited to go back to Germany as a guest of the German government, but she refused. She said, I am never stepping foot on German soil again. But in the year 2000, my brother, sister, and I convinced her that it would be really good closure. So the German government allowed them to bring one guest with them. And my mom wrote back to the mayor of Stuttgart and said, I will come if, if, oops, I'm sorry. I will come if you allow me to bring three generations, myself, my daughter, and my granddaughter, to come to Germany and dance on Hitler's grave. Now, we know Hitler's not buried in Germany, but it was just a philosophical thing. And they said yes. The point being that while we were on this trip, and the epilogue in the book describes our experience going back to Germany. But while we were there, other people, there were 20 other survivors that were on this trip. And because they did it a lot during the year. And there's usually no more than 20 because the head of cultural affairs of Germany was taking us around wherever we wanted to go. But other people started talking about their experience. And all of a sudden, my mom opened up and was saying things that I had no clue. And it was when she came back from the trip to Germany that she sat down and she wrote her memoir. But she requested that we not do anything with it until she passed, which was in October of 2021. And at first I didn't understand it, but now I do, because I know my mom did not want, I have done dozens of podcasts and interviews around the world about this book and my mom's experience. My mom would not have wanted to go over it and over it and over it again. And in fact, it's a little hard even for me. So that's how the book got started. And when she passed, my brother, sister, and I started the process of publishing her memoir. And that's what the book is.
I think that's a beautiful thing to do. I mean, we need to learn more about this, and I can understand the trauma. I should say I understand it, but it just brings back, it's almost like PTSD is what we talk about, right?
It is. It is. And the thing is that there are a lot of Holocaust deniers in the world. And that is why it is so important to bring these true stories. And as I'm talking about this, I get calls and emails from people telling me their story. And I say, no, publish your story. You need to get it out there. It's very important. But, the Jews in Germany were very loyal and committed citizens. They were a real part of German society. They weren't only doctors, lawyers, engineers, architects. They were business leaders and merchants and volunteers. And I think, my grandmother's family, they saw the writing on the wall in the late 20s and early 30s. And her brother and even my grandfather's brother left.
Oh,
And
wow.
they begged my grandfather to get his family out of Germany. But my grandfather was a war hero for Germany in World War I. And he just felt nothing is going to happen. Those brown shirts, they're just a bunch of hoodlums. They're harmless. And he wouldn't leave. And then it was too late. And then it was too late, especially, in 1936, my mom was thrown out of her public school. No Jews were allowed in the public schools anymore. And the brown shirts roamed the streets, harassing and beating innocent Jews, putting swastikas on businesses and homes. And in 1938 is when they took my grandfather's business, the car, the home, everything. And at that point, America had basically closed its doors to more Jewish immigrants. So they were desperately trying to go elsewhere, Argentina, other places in Europe, Israel, basically any country that would let them in. And then, of course, the famous November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, when that was the destruction of all the temples, burning down synagogues, homes, businesses, and Jews could not get out of Germany. Whoever was left and wasn't already in a camp was then rounded up and sent to the death camps. My grandfather, Kristallnacht, was November 9th. And my mom and my grandmother witnessed on November 10th him being dragged out of their home and sent off to Dachau.
Oh, wow.
So,
That is just, I just got the chills. My skin is all,
yeah.
it's so scary because this happened and it happens more than people realize. We got to look for red flags. And I think there's why it's important to talk about history, because we got some red flags
Exactly.
everywhere.
I mean, it's a very scary time right now for the Jewish community. I compare what we're going through now with the terrorists on college campuses and in cities all over the world to that early 1930s brown shirt situation where it seems to be ignored. It seems as though no action is being taken for these people who are, harassing, attacking, and threatening the Jewish community. There's no interference or punishment. These mobs are basically having a free-for-all, doing whatever they want without punishment. And it does remind me. And I mean, I think you had said at one point, we need to look at red flags, and we need to look at history.
Right.
Remember how these things progressed from the first incidents that happened to concentration camps and the murder of millions of people. And so, my grandmother, we do not know where she was during this period. When my grandfather was taken away, my grandmother took my mom to the Catholic Church where she was hidden.
Wow.
And my grandfather escaped Dachau, which is an unbelievable story described, in the book. When he escaped, he knew exactly where to go to get my grandmother and my mom. I don't know where my grandmother was at this point. My mom did not know where my grandmother was.
She was young, right? Yeah.
She was hiding somewhere, but they just don't know where. But obviously, my grandfather was able to find her when he escaped.
And he probably had a lot of undercover help too, right? I would think.
Well, basically, my grandmother had a first cousin. This is the amazing thing. She had a first cousin, Emanuel Rosenfeld. That was his birth name. He was a brilliant mathematician. He was a numbers guy. He worked for Schach. Now, the name Schach might be familiar to you because he was tried at the Nuremberg trials. He worked for him when Schach was president of the Reich Bank,
Oh, wow.
the largest bank in Germany. And my grandmother's first cousin worked for Schach in that bank. When Hitler took power, he brought Schach to be his Minister of Finance and Economics for the Third Reich. And who did Schach bring with him?
Here.
Emanuel Rosenfeld, because he was the brains
Right.
that Schach did not have. He brings him with him. But when things got worse for the Jews, my grandmother's first cousin got scared and realized what was going on. And he quit his position, and he was so scared, he actually changed his name to Max Emanuel.
Oh,
And
wow.
he lived in fear that he would be discovered. He applied to leave for the United States to get a visa. At that point, the US was not taking any more Jewish immigrants, but they took him. They were willing to take him because he was a banker. He knew where the Germans hid their money. He knew where the international places were where the Nazis were sending off their money. So the US government needed him, wanted him. The day Max Emanuel, who is now, was Emanuel Rosenfeld,
Right.
the day he got his visa, he got a call from my grandmother's brother in America that grandpa had been taken to concentration camp and he needs to get him out.
Oh, God.
Now, can you imagine? Talk about bravery, talk about loyalty. Here he has the opportunity to get his cousin out of a concentration camp or get the heck out of Germany and go to America. And what does he choose to do? He chooses to drive in the middle of the night the 400 kilometers from Berlin to Dachau to get my grandfather out of the concentration camp. And I don't want to give away the end of the book, but one thing that I will tell you, the reason he was able to do this, he did not get rid of his German Third Reich identification papers that said he worked for the Third Reich.
Ah.
And those papers got him through the checkpoints all the way to the concentration camp. But the bravery and this journey that every few miles he had to go through a checkpoint and risk his life as he passed through one Nazi checkpoint after another. It's amazing. And, I don't know, would I have done the same thing? Would you have done the same thing? Would we have literally risked our lives and risked going off to a concentration camp ourselves? It's an interesting, introspective question that we should all ask ourselves.
I like how he put his family before himself. So I mean, that's how I see it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, obviously he was successful. And
How did he do it? I mean, how did he get him out of the camp once? I mean, I guess it's in the book, but that's just
it is
amazing.
in the book. It is in the book. But I will tell you that you probably cannot get anyone out of a concentration camp unless you're able to manipulate
Right.
some kind of a plan that you are or pretend to be connected to the higher ups. Now,
That's true. Right.
and keep in mind, probably the people at the checkpoints, at 11 p.m., midnight, 1, 2, 3 in the morning. They're probably young soldiers. They're probably not the generals or the higher ups. And these kids are scared themselves of doing anything
Right.
wrong. God
Yes.
forbid someone with papers showing that, they're working for the Third Reich, comes through. Are you going to question them?
True. You don't want to get in trouble.
Exactly. So, I mean, they got out. They immediately he immediately with Max Emanuel went and got my mom from the Catholic Church, went and got my grandmother wherever she was. They headed to Luxembourg where she had another brother. They waited in Luxembourg for a visa to get to America, then ended up in Antwerp, Belgium, which is where they left to go to
Right.
America.
Right.
And my grandfather's brother was in Chicago, and my grandfather's brother, my grandfather's sister, who took my grandfather's advice and didn't leave, ended up in Auschwitz with her husband and children, and they were killed.
Oh gosh.
So that was my grandfather's sister. The brother got out early, and then my grandmother's brothers all left early. And so the brother that made the call to Max Emanuel was in Albany, New York, which is where I was born. And that's where they headed. They headed to Albany.
I think that is amazing story. I think a lot of people who have come from during that time frame, I for some reason, all New York, there's a lot of maybe that's why there's a lot of Jewish population in New York.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think that that's true because that's where Ellis Island was, and
Yes.
they went through Ellis Island. But when you talk about resilience, and I know you talk about that all the time,
Yeah.
it's like the soldiers who come home and suffer from PTSD. Often, if you get help, you overcome that. A lot of
Mhm.
survivors of the Holocaust came to America and they actually did really well. Elie Wiesel is a perfect example, and a lot of them, he wrote many, many books about this situation. But others started businesses and they really bounced back. My grandmother and my mom did fine. They were having a great life here in America, were happy. My grandfather, he was alive, but he really did not survive. What he saw at the concentration camp never left him.
Right.
My memory of my grandfather is him sitting in the living room, smoking his cigar, staring out the window. But he never got help. In those days, you just didn't talk
Right.
with people. And maybe and like I had said when we started, none of them ever spoke a word about what happened to them during this period. And so it was bottled up inside. So
Yeah, they suppressed it. I think that was kind of normal back then too. Like you
I
said,
think you're right.
it wasn't a normal thing to talk about that, and you just got to tough it up. Or
Or your problems. It
uh,
wasn't a normal thing. And especially parents never discussed anything negative with their children. You,
correct.
it just wasn't the thing they did. And so if they had a horrific experience, that stayed inside of them, which is very unhealthy, as we know.
Right, especially, yeah,
Yeah,
it causes so much stress, and it's
exactly.
just this amazing story that you're sharing. So based on this history of your family, how has it affected your outlook in life?
So I think it has made me a very positive person. There are people when bad things happen to them and they'll say, well, it's not cancer. You've probably heard that before, right? Well, for me, no matter what, I think of my grandfather and the 6 million Jews and the 4 million non-Jews that were killed during
Trying
the
to help.
Holocaust. And I think about them and I think it's not, I'm very, very lucky and I'm very positive because that no matter what the bad situation is, I think about these kinds of situations where people have suffered. And as I mentioned, I'm a little bit nervous as a Jewish person about what is going on around the world with all of the Jewish hatred that's happening. It does scare me. And it makes it a little more difficult to say, well, this isn't the Holocaust, because I think, well, that's what my grandfather said, that, oh, this is nothing, ignore it. They're just a bunch of hoodlums. They're not going to do any harm. It worries me. But in general, I'm a very positive person. I get that from my mom, who was always a positive person.
Right. She learned to focus on the positive after the negative stuff, right? I think that you got to acknowledge the negative, but then focus on the positive is going to help you move forward. It'll pick you up. And the resilience is something I don't think we're born with. We have to deal with something, I think.
Exactly. And I think that people that don't have a way of relaxing those negative thoughts need to develop that, because we
Yeah.
all have the potential to be resilient. And some of it is, learned, most of it is learned, learned power.
Yeah.
And we have to find that within ourselves, however we do that.
I think also, as you were talking, that's probably your family's history experience also got you into the health world, something subconsciously, right?
Well, I've always been a person that has worked in nonprofits.
Uh-huh.
So, that's really my passion. And since I retired just before we did the book, which was a good thing, because like I said, throughout Europe, Australia, New Zealand, I've been doing interviews, which makes me so excited that the book is out there and people are reading it and seeing it and calling me and asking if I can talk to groups or whatever. So
This.
yeah, that's been just wonderful. And I'm able to do it because I can put that in a separate place. Then,
Right.
initially it was very hard to do the editing. It was very hard, reading this over and over, what my grandfather went through. And by the way, the book does document some of the things that happened to him in Dachau.
Ugh.
So there's some very troubling things that are unbelievable. And those behaviors haven't changed to people for people in the world that hate. Those,
That's true. We need to learn
the
to be
meanness. Yeah.
kinder, being
Yeah,
kind. And that's something
exactly.
that we, for some reason, for each generation, we need to teach them or be examples. And you're being an example of learning from your mother, right? And
Exactly. Exactly.
this is amazing. And I think kids, before we started recording, I mentioned this. I think it's important for them to learn about history and to not sugarcoat everything. You have to be careful how you say it based on the age of the child, but they need to be aware of that. And it's just wow. I love history. This is not historical fiction, guys. This is real history. What
Yeah,
happened here?
this is a true story. And
Yeah.
you're right. I mean, how can we prevent things from happening if we don't know the
Yes.
past history of the negative parts of our history as well as the positive parts of
Yes.
our history?
We need to
And
know that.
you always hear people say, you don't want to repeat history, but it's easy to repeat it as what's happening out there now to the Jewish communities, if you don't know the past history. So I'm just really thrilled that you're having me speak about this.
Cool.
And I hope that your listeners, your viewers, get on Amazon. The book is available on Amazon, Escape from
Okay.
Dachau. My mom's name is Kathy Mueller Slonim, and it is available on Amazon, and it's getting incredible 5-star reviews. People are saying they read it in one sitting. They could not put it down. And I
Yeah.
hope that,
I think a physical book is good, by the way, guys. I think to me, something like that, you want it. I engage better with something physical. I love this. I love books. I love what you're doing. And you're being very open. And I'm pretty sure that you're going to make an impact. That's really what it is.
It is. And the one thing that I would ask is, and I ask this of anyone that lets me know that they purchased the book,
Uh-huh.
please, when you're done reading it, do not put it on a bookshelf. Donate it to your library, donate it to your high school. It can either go in the high school library or to the history department, the head of the history department, so they can use it as a learning tool.
Oh,
So
that's
I ask everybody, please, when you're done reading it, don't put it on a bookshelf, pass it on.
share it. Yeah,
Share it.
that's so awesome. So if anybody wants to connect with you directly, Susan, what is the best way?
The best way to connect with me is through my they can do my email. There is a website for the book, and it's got all of my contact information on there. So there, you could just look up the website of Escape from Dachau.
And what I'll do for those listening, I'll include the link in the notes, the description. That's
Great.
really helpful because some people could be listening as they're driving.
Right, exactly. Oh yes, exactly.
That is, I'm impressed with what you've done. It's a lot of work went into this, guys, as someone who's from the background of publishing. It's just a lot of work, but you did it. You showed that you have the tenacity and the resilience to help get your grandfather and your mother's story out there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I like this. Read it, guys. Gotta learn about history. Thanks again for your time, Susan.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you so much.